Welcome to my defense of the PhD project called How Game Jams and Hackathons Accelerate Design Processes. So in this presentation, I will present the overall project, and because I'm limited on time, I will focus on some select areas of the project and leave some details out. But the written dissertation presents the work much more thoroughly. So the areas that I will focus on presenting now are the overarching topic of these two phenomena of game jams and hackathons, the motivation for the project, briefly also how I have approached the project in terms of selected theories and various methods. And lastly, I will present the contributions of the project and discuss some implications that these contributions may have. So first off, let me describe what game jams and hackathons are about. So typical game jams can be described as an accelerated opportunistic game creation event where a game is created in a relatively short time frame, exploring given design constraints and where end results are shared publicly. So some games which we can consider as more commercial successes and which originated in such a game jam are, for example, the game Fortnite, the indie game Celeste, and the games Goat Simulator and Surgeon Simulator. And maybe some of these games may be familiar to the audience. The way that we can describe hackathons are quite similar to how game jams are described. So typical hackathons can be described as rapid design and development events at which volunteer participants come together to conceptualize, prototype, and make mostly digital products and services. The structure of most hackathons is similar. They occur over the span of a day or two. Challenges are presented to participants, teams form around these challenges, the teams engage in a fervor of activity to produce solutions of a varying completeness. And at the end of the event, the teams present their work. In some cases, judges are brought in and awards are given. So several companies use hackathons, for example, both internally in their own production cycle, and they also often sponsor these hackathons. So for instance, here it is explained why Facebook use hackathons, and I quote, "There have been hackathon projects that have changed the direction of the company in terms of what we focus on and how we think about our strategy and what we realize is possible. The thesis is, if 100 people have an idea that could be awesome, the next big thing, try all of them. 99 of them are going to be terrible, but there's going to be that one idea that is going to be awesome." And here are some examples of some companies that are known to conduct hackathons. But we could ask ourselves, if so many of the developed ideas and projects are not really usable, and this goes for both game jams and hackathons, then why do people still organize and participate in game jams and hackathons? So we know from studies that the developed prototypes are often not really usable and rarely innovative. And the same goes for game jams, where the developed games are evaluated as only average by the participants themselves. Despite this, one of the main reasons for people to participate in hackathons is because of learning, for instance. And the same goes for game jams as well, where participants experience that something very unique happens within a game jam. And this something special is an important aspect of the potential future life of a vibrant games industry. So even though the developed outcomes of both game jams and hackathons are often suboptimal, it seems that participation is still perceived as beneficial, as these studies suggest. So even though we know that participants are highly motivated to join these events, we don't know much about this special something that happens during game jams or hackathons. For instance, there's much research that focus on what hackathons can do, like in terms of developed prototypes, but with little research on how design processes in them unfold. And relevant for game jams specifically, the field of human-computer interaction has embraced research on games and play. However, research shows that studies of game developers and tools for game creation is missing. Furthermore, traditionally, the research field of game studies, where much game jam research has their roots, has focused on notions of game, player, and playing, whereas notions of design, designer, process, and practice have been peripheral, despite the fact that game design is one of the most used keywords in research on games. So summing up, there's been little research on the inner workings of design processes during hackathons and game jams, pointing towards a gap in research. So as I so far have shown, game jams and hackathons share several aspects. And summing up for typical hackathon and game jam formats, they both typically impose a short time frame on participants meant to accelerate the design process and facilitate creativity. They are often attended by, for example, programmers, designers, writers, students, professionals, amateurs, and researchers. They're often open for anyone curious to participate. They have both resulted in a few commercial success stories. And both formats have been introduced in many contexts: industry, as you saw before, but also government institutions, non-profit organizations, academia, where it's used for teaching, learning, and research. So throughout the PhD project, I have not sought to set strict boundaries as to what entails a hackathon or a game jam. And the reason for this is that the formats have many similarities. And furthermore, aspects which are typically ascribed to game jams can be found in hackathons and vice versa. Some hackathons encourage a playful approach to the design process, an aspect usually ascribed to game jams. And an example on this is the Stupid Hackathon, as it's called. Some game jams seek to create games that can create positive social impacts by solving real-world problems, an aspect which is often ascribed to hackathons, such as the collaboration between the Global Game Jam and Games for Change. So therefore, on a general level, the PhD project have sought to study these shared aspects. And I focus on how the findings from studying both game jams and hackathons can generate insights on the shared aspects of accelerating design processes. So wanting to study the shared aspects of hackathons and game jams led me to use the term accelerated design processes. And the inspiration for this term comes from several sources. For example, game jams have been described as accelerated game development and as accelerated opportunistic game creation events. And another inspiration for the term is the notion of creativity constraints, which accelerate a design process. And it also generates connotations to rapid prototyping. So to sum up, accelerated design processes is an umbrella term for the design processes taking place in formats such as game jams and hackathons. So in order to approach the research gaps and also motivated by wanting to study the shared aspects of hackathons and game jams, the PhD project worked with 3 overarching research questions. How can we understand the accelerated design process during hackathons and game jams? How have people organized game jams and hackathons in academia and for creativity? How may we explore alternative ways of organizing hackathons and game jams for academia and for supporting creativity? So the PhD dissertation in itself consists of selected publications from my full publication list, as can be seen here. So the dissertation consists of these 5 papers, 4 published and peer-reviewed, and 1 is currently submitted for review. And they are paper 1 is called The Dynamic Design Space During a Game Jam and was published at the Academic Mindtrick Conference. Paper 2 is called The 4 Factors Informing Design Judgment at a Hackathon, published at OSCAI. Paper 3 is called Co-Notate, Exploring Real-Time Annotations to Capture Situational Design Knowledge, and which was published at DIS. Paper 4 is called How Organizers Understand and Promote Participants' Creativity in Game Jams, and this is the one submitted for review. Paper 5 is called 10 Years of Research with and on Hackathons, and published in DIS. So I have approached the 3 research questions by using several different methods. For the first 2 papers, I conducted first-person research, meaning that both papers revolve around autobiographical design case studies, meaning that I participated in a game jam and a hackathon as both a researcher and as a participant on equal terms with my group members. For paper 3, I change perspective and I conduct an intervention using a tool called Connotate, and by organizing a game jam as an integral part of a university course. The study was a case study of a participant's experience of using the tool Connotate, which enabled them to record and annotate their design process in real time. And I used surveys and interviews to study this. For paper 4 and 5, the PhD project moved up on a top-down perspective for the methods for exploring game jams, organizers' perspective in paper 4, and for exploring researchers' perspective in paper 5. I used surveys for exploring the game jam, organizer perspective, and conducted a comprehensive literature review of research literature in paper 5. So in order to give an overview of the timely aspects of the PhD project, I have here a relative timeline of the conducted studies. The gray dots are studies and the black dots are when the study was published. So I started out with the 2 first-person research studies in the Nordic Game Jam and in a local hackathon at Aarhus University called the AU Hack. Shortly after, the intervention with Connotate was conducted. And later, the first top-down study in terms of the literature review was conducted. And finally, the last top-down study of the game jam organizer's perspective was conducted. So this methodology in the PhD project is based on a theoretical foundation which builds on pragmatist theory on design processes, primarily by Donald Schoen, who was inspired by the pragmatist philosophy of John Dewey. Very shortly described, pragmatism acknowledges that theory and practice are closely intertwined and mutually susceptible. So this pragmatist design theory warrants how I understand and study design processes. And one consequence of having a worldview based on pragmatist design theory is that the world is viewed as a dynamic and emerging phenomenon, which is never stable. With this worldview, a pragmatist researcher does not focus on methods, but on the research question, and use all the available approaches to understand and approach the research question. Informed by the pragmatic perspective on design, which entails that human cognition and activity are deeply situated, I have used a mix of qualitative and exploratory methods, which engages with accelerated design processes in situ. Paper 1, 2, and 3 exemplifies this. As part of improving the understanding of accelerated design processes, I broadened the perspective in paper 4 and 5 and moved from the situatedness of accelerated design processes to a top-down perspective. Furthermore, pragmatist design theory grounds the study of design processes within a well-established field that offers a detailed vocabulary to study the dynamic transformations which takes place in hackathons and game jams. A part of this theoretical foundation based on pragmatist design theory, and which I want to highlight, is the theoretical notion of design spaces as defined by Biska, Dalsgaard, and Halsgaard, who define it as a conceptual space which encompasses the creativity constraints that govern what the outcome of the design process might and might not be. This definition builds upon Schoen's pragmatic perspective, in which a design space denotes a conceptual space of opportunities constructed and developed by the designers via their inquiry. This concept provides a structured framework to analyze the different constraints of a design process and how these transform and change dynamically throughout a design process. A last part of the theoretical foundation, which I want to highlight in order to clarify my theoretical stance, is creativity research. Creativity is acknowledged as an integral part of design. Therefore, select key concepts from creativity research inform the theoretical foundation as well. Particularly relevant for the study of accelerated design processes is the notion of creativity constraints, which at the same time can limit and enable thinking about possibilities for creative design processes. The notion of creativity constraints is a useful concept since it distills and clarifies the factors which shapes accelerated design process and thereby the outcome. So a last comment on creativity research. Creativity is a multifaceted phenomenon, and therefore it should be studied with different approaches. The concept of creativity constraint is one theoretical approach through which I have viewed hackathons and game jams. In paper 4, we include other notions of creativity, which are novelty, combinational creativity, and risk-taking, in addition to creativity constraints in game jams. We acknowledge that these notions of creativity may not capture all parts of how creativity takes place in game jams. However, we argue that they capture some of the most central things relevant to creativity in game jams. So summing up on how the theoretical foundation is expressed in the papers, here is an overview of how the theoretical foundation plays different roles in the papers. And as you can see, pragmatist design theory has placed an essential role during the project, while the theoretical notions of design spaces and creativity constraints played roles in parts of the PhD project. So turning back to the research questions, paper 1 and 2 contributes to answering how we can understand accelerated design processes during hackathons and game jams. Paper 4 and 5 contributes to answering how people have organized game jams and hackathons in academia and creativity. Lastly, paper 3, 4, and 5 contributes to discussing how we may explore alternative ways of organizing hackathons and game jams for academia and for supporting creativity. And now I will present the main contributions of the papers as they answer the 3 research questions. Paper 1 and 2 contributes to a foundation for understanding accelerated design processes. They offer descriptive and detailed process level knowledge on how 2 accelerated design processes were shaped by the formats of respectively a game jam and a hackathon. They thereby present exemplars on accelerated design processes, which contextualize and solidify how a design process may be accelerated in a game jam and hackathon format. We found that group composition entailed particular preferences, expectations, domain knowledge, and technical knowledge, which affect what is feasible for the group to achieve within the short time frame of a hackathon or a game jam. They demonstrate how the constrained format can entail a heightened focus on the situation of the game jam or hackathon, or in other words, an inward-oriented focus and not necessarily a focus on impacts beyond the immediate design situation. Because the limitation of resources such as time, tools, and materials are particularly pervasive. This has impact for what can be expected to be designed in similar game jam and hackathon formats, such as the ones that we studied. Paper 4 and 5 contributes with retrospective and contemporary overviews, respectively, of how game jams have been organized for supporting creativity and of how hackathons have been organized within academia. Paper 4 contributes with a report on what game jam organizers find important when organizing game jams and a nuanced overview of how they understand creativity in terms of novelty, risk-taking, creativity constraints, and combinational creativity. Additionally, we report different initiatives which the organizers themselves believe support their participants' creativity. Paper 5 contributes with an overview of how hackathons have been used as means and as research focus in academia for structuring learning, including teaching, structuring different processes, including for facilitating research in various ways, and for enabling participation, including engaging citizens and minorities in developing with technology. Another important contribution of paper 5 is the overview of researchers' experience of benefits and challenges of hackathon formats. This contribution prepares the ground for how to critically reflect on when and how to use hackathons. Lastly, paper 3, 4, and 5 contribute to the discussion of how hackathons and game jams may be organized, particularly within academia, and furthermore with the purpose of supporting creativity. Paper 3 contributes with the identification and analysis of benefits and challenges of using a real-time annotation tool to capture in situ knowledge in accelerated design processes. The game jam we organized in paper 3 can also be framed as an adaptation of a game jam format, with the purpose of exploring an academic game jam in the sense of supporting the participants' reflections and knowledge generation during the process. In paper 5, we broaden the perspective and explore how other researchers have adapted hackathon formats for specific purposes as well. Paper 5 can then be used as a form of reference work for researchers wishing to conduct research with their own hackathons, as the paper contributes with a broad overview of how others have organized hackathons in academia, as well as an overview of benefits and challenges. Paper 4 contributes to the discussion of how game jams may be organized for supporting creativity by discussing how the game jam organizers already existing practices may be advanced with insights from recent creativity research in terms of 4 creativity aspects. And finally, I will now discuss some implications of the contributions of the PhD project. So to sum up, accelerated design processes can potentially lead to a highly inward-oriented focus on the immediate design situation of the format, where the relatively immediate feasibility of prototypes is prioritized over thoroughly identifying and designing for authentic user needs. While this observation is based on 2 case studies in paper 1 and paper 2, and can therefore not be generalized, the extensive review in paper 5 identifies several researchers who voice concerns about hackathons and how the kind of fast innovation, for example, risk devaluing the slow work of creating infrastructures. Irani also note how the pace in hackathons rarely left time for real footwork to build trust with citizens. Hackathon participants' knowledge is often gained informally via, for example, representatives of target users at the hackathon venue. This can be problematic as it ignores formal social science methods for gaining deeper understandings of social issues. Continuing on this concern, Gamma notes how developers in hackathons use their personal experience for creating technology, which they think will be appealing to users. Especially paper 2 exemplifies how and why these perhaps concerning practices may unfold in a hackathon setting. Together, paper 1 and paper 2 contextualize how an accelerated design process unfolds and help solidify why these types of design processes may, for example, lead to short-lived outcomes. Summarizing from the insights from particularly paper 1, 2, and 5, accelerated design processes are accelerated in the sense that participants may prioritize, for example, immediate and maybe even defect technical functionality, as long as it serves the purpose of visualizing an idea, and cursory and informal methods for obtaining immediate understanding of users. At the same time, participants may, for example, disregard formal and lengthy methods for obtaining deeper understandings and deliberate technical development, including ensuring technical security measures. An implication of my PhD project is how organizers of game jams and hackathons may consider when and how to organize these formats, considering some of the challenges which accelerated design processes may entail. And for instance, how they may prompt an inward-oriented focus for participants. And this again depends on the purpose of the game jam or hackathon. A situation which we may consider is when accelerated design processes are part of longer design processes. It may be appropriate to organize accelerated design processes when a hands-on and rapid prototyping approach is suitable for exploring the first steps of going from abstract concepts and theories to concrete prototypes. In those first steps of a longer design process, facilitating an accelerated design process could be used to quickly develop prototypes in parallel, which can then be explored and compared to each other. Then the outcomes can be studied more comprehensively during a longer time frame, which allows time for instance, user involvement. Another situation which we may consider is when outcomes are valued in the immediate design situation. Some of the challenges regarding, for example, the limited sustainability and longevity of the developed outcomes may not be a concern if the game jam or hackathon aim to encourage participants to create outcomes which have value in the immediate situation. This could, for example, be a prototype with entertainment value created at a game jam, as was the case in paper 1, or in cases where the emphasis is on participants' process of speculation about possible futures manifested in experimental prototypes, as also argued by Boehner and DeSalvo. Then the focus is more on the participants' own experience and learning process. Another situation which we may consider is when outcomes are valued outside the immediate design situation. If the intention with organizing hackathons or game jams is to create outcomes which have value outside of the immediate design situation of the format, then a potential inward orientation of the participants' accelerated design process may be a matter of concern. And then typical accelerated design processes may be problematic. In this context, long-term participatory design processes may be more preferable, or at least the accelerated design processes should be planned as part of a longer design process. When short-term design process engagement can be a benefit, in the cases where there is public access to participating in a game jam or hackathon, participants who have never developed technology before and are curious on technology development can explore technology and participate in imagining possible futures with the technology. Participants can also experience what it means to engage in a design process of generating ideas and attempt to manifest those ideas into prototypes. In these cases, participants do not have to engage in long-term design processes, such as pursuing an education or professional career, to experience technology development or a design process. An accelerated design process may also be a first step for some participants in pursuing such longer-term processes. This reflects the promise of the maker movement, that accelerated design processes can potentially contribute to democratizing technology development. And lastly, when participation is a concern, while hackathons and game jams can be opportunities for some participants to try out designing and developing technology and games for the first time, there are still ethical challenges in terms of who gets to participate, who does not get to participate, as well as how people get to participate. For instance, an important insight from Kopek and colleagues is that inviting end users to a hackathon is not enough. The reason for this being that it cannot be assumed that all participants, whether they are invited end users or developers participating in the accelerated design process, can both participate on equal terms. End users need to not only be invited as an input to the hackathon or game jam, but to be actively supported and perceived as participants with valid insights during the process of a hackathon if full collaboration and participatory design is envisioned. So while my PhD project contributes to how we may understand accelerated design processes, only preliminary steps were taken to explore alternative ways of organizing hackathons and game jams. Exploring alternative ways of organizing hackathons and game jams is an important endeavor, as these formats do entail some promising potentials. However, the potential democratizing aspects cannot be assumed.